どうも、勝手に電力2.0で始めたいと思います。今日は1141回目というところで、このネットゼロロードマップというところの IA のところですね、このあたりも少しですね、1ヶ月前ぐらいにされたものなんですけれども、更新されたもので少しお話ししようかなと思っていますと。Net Zero Roadmap are global pathway to keep the 1.55 system goal in reach. Net Zero Roadmap are gold pathway to keep the 1.5度、ゴールインリーチは、国際エネルギー機関 IA が2021年公表した10で2000達成するための更新バンド。で、今回公式されたですね、ネット排出シナリオ2050シナリオを提出しています。この取り組みは特に重要であり、エネルギーセクターは温室効果ガス排出の最大の源泉であり、これが進行中の気候危機において重要な要因であるからですと。このロードマップはパリ協定の目標である3極目のレベルの基準とした全温度上昇の1.5度に制限するための実行可能なパスウェイとみなされている、ただ唯一のパスウェイではありませんということで、実際これチャット GPT 書いてあるので、こんなことが言われていますと。でロードマップは1.5度目標の道のりがより困難になっていることを明らかにしていますが、クリーンエネルギーの成長がこの目標を達成可能にしていますが、主な戦略としては、再生可能エネルギーの拡大、再エネの拡大ですね、エネルギー効率の向上、エフィシェンシーですね、メタン排出の削減、および利用可能な技術を用いた電化の強化ですね、が含まれています。これらの措置は、2030年までに必要な排出削減の80%以上に貢献すると予想されている。なので、結構取り組むべきことは絞られているんですね。8割ぐらいの、やっぱり日発の原則みたいな感じで、この2割のことに取り組めば8割以上の効果があると。で、実際にこの具体的には、ロードマップは2030年までに再生可能エネルギー容量を1万1000ギガワットに3倍にすることを強調しており、この期間に最も大きな排出削減を提供することで予測されると。さらに、年間年率を2倍にすることもロードマップでいるで、このシナリオは、電動車とヒートポンプのクリーンテクノロジーの採用を加速させて、エネルギーシステム全体で電化を推進する重要性を強調と。これは2030年までに排出削減のおよそ5分の1を提供すると。さらに、ロードマップは2030年までにエネルギーセクターからのメタン排出を75%削減することが短期間での温暖化を制限するための低コストの機会であると強調。で、結論が、IA によるこのロードマップは2050年までにネットゼロ排出を達成し、1.5度の温度上昇制限というグローバル目標に沿った構造化された実行可能なバスを提供しており、クリーンエネルギーの成長と技術採用がこの努力により重要な役割を果たすと。で、実際に今度太陽光の分でいくと、太陽光発電の拡大が重要な要素であることが強調と。ロードマップでは2030年までに全球の再生可能エネルギー容量を、3倍にするということですが、2030年は最も大きな排出削減を提供すると予測されており、再エネ、特に太陽光発電、風力発電広く利用可能で理解されているしばしば事実上に展開可能でコスト効率が高いとされていると。で過去2年間の公的な進展として、太陽光の設置と電気自動車ですね、2021年の Z0-2050 の報告書で設定されたマイルストーンに沿って進行している。なので、計画通り言っているのが、この EV と太陽光だけなんですね。ロードマップによれば、現在発表されている太陽光発電とバッテリーの製造能力拡大が完全に実施されれば、この更新された NZE シナリオにおける2030年までの需要を満たすのが十分であるとされていると。このロードマップでは先進国、中国はすでにこのグローバル目標の85%達成するための軌道にありますが、他の新興国と開発途上国により強力な政策と国際的な支援が必要であるとされています。すべての国において、強化のスピードアップ、認可とかですね、実際に電力のグリッドの拡張及び近代化、供給チェーンのボトルネックの解消及び再生可能エネルギーの安全な統合が重要であると強調と。で、インドネシアに関するところで言うと、エネルギーセクターへのネットゼロ排出のロードマップは人々の中心の変革、実際に石炭市場の段階的、まさに石炭はやっぱり問題ですよね。投資及び資金調達のニーズ及び重要なミネラルといったキーエリアに焦点を当てていますと。このロードマップはインドネシアが2050年までネットゼロを達成する高い野心を持ったパスウェイを設定と。国際エネルギー IA のロードマップによれば、インドネシアは2060年までネットゼロを達成することにより、家庭のエネルギー請求額を今のレベルから減らし、国全体の経済にとって2030年までに通常のビジネスシナリオと比較して、石油輸入請求額を3分の1に減らすことができると示されていると。インドネシアでは2060年までにまたはそれ以前にネットゼロ排出を達成するという野心的な目標を設定しており、2045年までに先進経済国になるというインドネシアの包括的な開発目標の一部と。しかし、この明確な目標に至るまでの長い道のりが残っているとされていると。2060年までのネットゼロ排出の道のりはインドネシアにとって手頃な価格とエネルギーの安全性を向上させる可能性があると。IA とインドネシアのエネルギー鉱物資源省 MEMR の両方の分析では、適切な政策が施行されれば、2060年までのネットゼロの道においては、電気の走行性のコストは安定してくると。で、もう一つ電気自動車ですね。電気自動車の採用の加速は、エネルギーシステム全体で電化を推進する重要な要因とされている。電気自動車の技術はエネルギーシステムの電化を牽引し、2030年までに排出削減のおよそ5分の1を提供されていると。電気自動車の販売の最近の成長は2030年までに新車販売の3分の2が電気自動車になることを目指すと。これはネットゼロ排出シナリオ、NZE シナリオにおける重要なマイルストーンであり、車メーカーからの発表される生産目標はこの高いシェアが達成可能であることを示していると。ヒートポンプの販売は2020年に全球で11%増加し、多くの市場、特に欧州連合では、 2030年までに必要されているおよそ20%の年間成長率を上回っていると進行しているということで、ある意味、電化っていうところもめちゃくちゃ大事だっていうところですね。In 2021, the IEA published its landmark report Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. Since then, the energy sector has been major shifts based on the latest data on technologies, market, and politics. This report presents an updated version of Net Zero emission by 2050 NZE scenario, a pathway, but not the only one for the energy sector to achieve net zero CO2 emission by 2050 and play its part as the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in achieving the 1.5 cesium goal. The path to 1.5 cesium has narrowed, but clean energy growth is keeping it open. The case for transforming the global energy system in line with the 1.5 cesium goal has never been stronger. August 2023 was the hottest on record by a large margin, the hottest month ever after July 2023. The impacts of climate change are increasingly frequent and severe, and scientific warnings about the danger of the current pathway have become stronger than ever. Global carbon dioxide CO2 emissions from the energy sector reached a new record high of 37 billion gigaton in 2022, 1% above their pre-pandemic level, are set to peak this the speed of the rollout of key clean energy technology means that the IEA now projects that demand for coal, oil, and natural gas will all peak this decade, even without any new climate politics. This is encouraging, but not nearly enough for the 1.5 cesium goal. Positive developments over the past 2 years include solar PV installations and electric car sales tracking in line with the milestones set out for them in our 2021 Net Zero by 2050 report. In response to the pandemic and the global energy crisis triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, governments around the world announced a raft of measures designed to promote the uptake of the range of clean energy technologies. Industry is ramping up quickly to supply many of them. If fully implemented, currently announced manufacturing capacity expansions for solar PV and batteries would be sufficient to meet demand by 2030. In this update of the NZE scenario, we have the tool need to go much faster, ramping up renewables, improving energy efficiency, cutting methane emissions, and increasing electrification with technologies that are available today deliver more than 80% of the emissions reductions needed by 2030. The key action required to bend the emissions curve sharply downwards by 2030 are well understood, most often cost-effective, and taking place at an accelerating rate. The scaling up of clean energy is the main factor behind the decline of fossil fuel demand of over 25% this decade in the energy scenario. But well-designed politics, such as the early retirement of repurposing of coal-fired power plants, are key to facilitate decline in fossil fuel demand and create additional room for clean energy to expand. In the NZE scenario, strong growth in clean energy and other policy measures together lead to energy sector CO2 emissions falling by 35% by 2030 compared to 2022. Renewables and efficiency are key to drive fossil fuel demand down, tripling global installed renewables capacity to 11,000 gigawatts by 2030 provide the largest emission reduction to 2030 in the energy scenario. Renewable electricity sources, in particular solar PV and wind, are widely available, well understood, and often rapidly deployable and cost-effective. Current policy setting already put advanced economics and China on track to achieve 85% of their contribution to this global goal. But stronger politics and international support are required in other emerging markets and developing economies. For all countries, speeding up, permitting, extending, and modernizing electricity grids, addressing supply chain bottlenecks, and security integrating variable renewable are critical. Doubling the annual rate of energy intensity improvement by 2030 in the energy scenario saves the energy equivalent of all oil consumption in road transport today, reduces emissions, boosts energy security, and improves affordability. Although the mix of priorities will differ by country, at the global level, energy intensity improvements stem from three equally important actions: improving the technical efficiency of equipment such as electronic motors and air conditioners, switching to more efficient fuels, in particular electricity and clean cooking solutions in low-income countries, and using energy and materials for more effectively. These two actions reduce fossil fuel demand, enabling continued adherence to a key milestone of our 2021 report and immediate end to new approvals of unvetted coal plants. Accelerating electrification and cutting methane are also essential. Booming technologies like electric vehicles and heat pumps drive electrification across the energy system, providing nearly one-fifth of the emissions reduction to 2030. In the NZE scenario, recent growth puts electric car sales on track to account for two-thirds of new car sales by 2030, a critical milestone in the NZE scenario. Announced production target from car maker underscore that this high share is achievable. Heat pump sales increased by 11% globally in 2022, and many markets, notably in European Union, are already tracking ahead of the roughly 20% annual growth rate needed to 2030 in the NZ scenario. China remains the world's largest market for heat pumps. Cutting methane emissions from the energy sector by 75% by 2030 is one of the least cost opportunities to limit global warming in the near term. Strong reduction in both energy sector CO2 and methane emissions are essential to meeting the 1.5 cesium goal. Without efforts to reduce methane emissions from fossil fuel supply, global energy sector CO2 emissions would need to reach net zero by around 2045, with important implications for equitable pathways. Emissions from oil and natural gas of the 75 million in cumulative spending to 2030, equivalent to just 2% of the net income received by the oil and gas industry in 2022. Much of this would be accompanied by net cost savings through the sale of captured methane. Innovation is already delivering new tools and lowering their cost. In the 2021 energy scenario, technology not available on the market at the time delivered nearly half of the emissions reductions needed in 2050 to reach zero. That number has fallen to around 35% in this update. Progress has been rapid. For example, the first commercialization of sodium-ion battery was announced for 2023, and a commercial scale demonstrations of solid oxide hydrogen electrolyzers are now underway. But we will need to do much more, notably on infrastructure. Today, much of the momentum is in small, modular clean energy technology like solar PV and batteries, but these alone are not sufficient to deliver net zero emissions. It will also require large, new, smarter, and repurposed infrastructure networks. Large quantities of low emission fuels and technologies to capture CO2 from smokestacks and atmosphere, more nuclear power, and large land area for renewables. Electricity transmission and distribution grids need to expand by around 2 million kilometers each year to 2030 to meet the needs of the NZ scenario. Building grids today can take more than a decade. with permitting a particularly time-consuming bottleneck. The same is true for other kind of ener- energy infrastructure. Policymaker, industry, and civil society need to work together to nurture build, build big mentality and to expedite decision making while preserving public engagement and respecting environmental safeguards. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage (CCUS), hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels, and sustainable bioenergy are critical to achieve net zero emissions. Rapid progress is needed by 2030. The history of CCUS has largely been one of the underperformance. Also, the recent surge of announced projects for CCUS and hydrogen is encouraging. The majority have yet to reach final investment decision and need further policy support to boost demand and facilitate new enabling infrastructure. Increasing clean energy investment in developing countries is vital. The world is set to invest a record USD 1.8 trillion in clean energy in 2023. This needs to climb to around USD 4.5 trillion a year by the early 2030s to be in line with our target. Clean energy investment is paid back over time through lower fuel bills. By 2050, energy sector investment and fuel bills are lower than today as share of global GDP. The sharpest jump in clean energy investment is needed in emerging market and developing economies other than China, where it surges sevenfold by the early 2030s in the energy scenario. This will require stronger domestic politics together with enhanced and more effective international support. Annual concessional funding for clean energy in emerging markets and developing economics will need to reach around USD 18 to 100 billion by the early 2030s. As clean energy expands and fossil fuel demand declines in the NZE scenario, there is no need for investment in new coal, oil, and natural gas. Stringent and effective policies in the NZE scenario support clean energy deployment and cut fossil fuel demand by more than 25% by 2030 and 80% in 2050. Coal demand falls from around 5,800 million tons of coal equivalent megaton in 2022 to 3,250 megaton by 2030 and around 500 megaton by 2050. Oil declined from around 100 million barrels per day to 77 barrels per day by 2030 and 24 mega barrels per day by 2050. Natural gas demand drops for 4,150 billion cubic meters in 2022 to 3,400 BCM in 2030 and 900 BCM in 2050. No new long lead times upstream oil and gas projects are needed in the energy scenario. Neither are new coal mines, mine extensions, or new embedded coal plants. Nonetheless, continued investment is required in existing oil and gas assets and already approved projects. Sequencing the decline of fossil fuel supply investment and the increase in clean energy investment is vital if damaging price spikes or supply gluts are to be avoided. The drop in fossil fuel demand and supply reduces traditional risk to energy security, but they do not disappear, especially in a complex and low-trust geopolitical environment. In the energy scenario, higher cost producers are squeezed out of decline market and supply starts to concentrate in large resource holders whose economies are most vulnerable to the process of change. But attempts by governments to prioritize domestic production must recognize the risk of locking in emissions that could push the world over the 1.5 system threshold, and that if the world is successful in bringing down fossil demand quickly enough to reach net zero emission by 2050, new projects would face major commercial risks. The net zero emission transition must be secure and affordable. Particular attention needs to be paid to bridging the looming supply and demand gap for critical minerals. Announced mining project for minerals such as nickel and lithium fall short of booming demand in extraction techniques. More recycling and material efficient design can help to bridge this gap. Extraordinary advances in clean energy technology supply chain have kept the door to net zero emissions open, but have been accompanied by a high degree of geographical or critical minerals are similarly highly concentrated. This presents an increased risk of disruption, such as from geopolitical tensions, extreme weather events, and or a simple industrial accident. While more diverse and resilient supply chains are highly desirable, the pace at which clean energy must be scaled up will be even harder to achieve without open supply chain. As electricity becomes the new oil or the global energy system in the NZE scenario, secure electricity supplies become even important. And the hugely increased need for electricity system flexibility requires massive growth of battery energy storage and demand response, expanded, modernized, and cyber secure transmission and distribution grids, and more dispatchable low emission capacity including fossil fuel capacity with CCUS, hydropower, biomass, nuclear, and hydrogen and ammonia-based plants. By 2030, in the NZ scenario, total household energy expenditure in emerging market and developing economies decreases by 12% from today's level, and even more in advanced economies. The decrease reflects large energy and cost saving from energy efficiency and electrification. However, policymakers need to support households, particularly low-income ones, to meet the often higher upfront cost of clean energy technology. There is no low international cooperation route to limit warning to 1.5 ccm and no slow route either. By 2035, emissions need to decline by 80% in advanced economies and 60% in emerging market and developing economies compared to the 2022 level. Current nationally determined contributions are not in line with countries' own net zero emission pledges, and those pledges are not sufficient to put the world on the pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. COP28 and the first global stocktake under the Paris Agreement provide a key opportunity to enhance and implementation. As part of an equitable pathway to the global goal of net zero emission by 2050, almost all countries need to bring forward their target net zero dates. In the NZ scenario, advanced economic take the lead and reach net zero emissions by around 2045 in aggregate. China achieved net zero emissions around 2050, and other emerging markets and developing economies do so only well after 2050. The net zero scenario is global but differentiated pathway. Each country will follow its own route based on its resources and circumstances. However, all must act much more strongly than they are today. The net zero pathway achieved full access to a modern forms of energy for all by 2030 through annual investment of nearly USD 45 billion per year, just over 1% of energy sector investment. Our delayed action case shows that failure to increase ambition to 2030 would create additional climate risks and make achieving the 1.5 system goal dependent on the massive deployment of carbon removal technologies, which are expensive and unproven at scale. Nearly 5 gigatons CO2 would have to be removed from the atmosphere every year during the second half of this century. If carbon removal technologies fail to deliver at such scale, returning the temperature to 1.5 cm would not be possible. Removing carbon from the atmosphere is costly and uncertain. We must do everything possible to stop putting it there in the first place. The fierce urgency of now. The energy sector is changing faster than many people think, but much more needs to be done, and time is short. Momentum is coming not just from the push to meet climate targets, but also from the increasingly strong economic case for clean energy, energy security imperatives, and the jobs and industrial opportunities that accompany the new energy economy. Yet, momentum must be accelerated to be in line with 1.5 ccm goal and to ensure that the process of change works for everyone. Above all, this needs to be a unified effort in which governments put tensions aside and find ways to work together on what is defining challenge of our time. All of us, and in particular future generations, we will remember with gratitude those who act on the urgency of now.